Good afternoon. My name is Siobhan Kinsella, and I serve at your pleasure as President of the Employment and Recruitment Federation. We're here today as a result of popular demand for the really comprehensive session that David Kearney did for us on Borders and Beyond. So I'd just like to introduce David and his company, HR Brief. So HR Brief is a specialist employment law, GDPR, and artificial intelligence company. So from the perspective of an awful lot of the smaller agencies out there, you might say, I couldn't afford the likes of HR Brief. I personally am a client of HR Brief and have been for in excess of 8 years. So whether it comes to our employment contracts, our policies and procedures, our GDPR, Dave acting as our DPO, and also into employment permits, and keeping us clean and making sure that we're not prosecuted, and also moving further into AI governance and beyond. Mary Siri Kearney is a barrister at law. David Siri Kearney is an expert in data protection, employment permits, and employment law. And the way that they've structured their business to support the Irish recruitment industry is, in effect, they operate on a retainer basis so that you don't have any massive upfront bills should you run into trouble or should you need assistance. So from my perspective, it's less expensive than hiring a junior in the office. And I always have that expert guidance on hand should we need it. And I'm very proud and happy to say that I haven't been in the WRC in 8 years, Dave. Thank you very much. So just before we move on, David's email address is David. I know we call him Dave, but his name is David. David at hrbrief.ie. So if you have any queries or you need specialist advice on your compliance controls, prevention is always better than cure, and that is the premise under which HR Brief operate. Now, they're fantastic in a crisis, I can attest. However, prevention is always what we're looking to have happen in our businesses because it is far less expensive than the cure. So, David at HR Brief, if you have any specific queries for David, the information that he's going to give us today is really comprehensive, but it is based in law. And the employment law, and the employment permits law that is in operation in Ireland can very much criminalise any abuse of it. So I'm going to ask Dave to just give us a very quick overview on the law that this is centred on, because ignorance isn't an excuse under the law. And in the event that you get audited by the WRC, or in the event that there is an issue around work permits and you don't know what's happening with your consultants or they're taking actions, you as a director of your organization are responsible. And as I say, ignorance isn't a defense under the law. This became particularly important, and Dave's help to our organization during the period of the pandemic, when there was an awful lot of changes into what was acceptable, what wasn't, what areas of grace you did or didn't have. And we remain completely clean throughout, and I'll be eternally grateful to Dave for that. So Dave, if you could just introduce yourself, give a bit of an overview on the law that this is centred on, and then start your very comprehensive presentation. I'm going to disappear from your screen, and there's been an awful lot of questions, which is brilliant, and Dave has very kindly offered to answer them. So if you put your questions in the Q&A, when it comes to the end of the presentation, I'll put the most pertinent questions to Dave. Is that okay? Thanks a million. Thanks, Dave. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Siobhan. I should have got you to be my best man at the wedding. Fantastic introduction. Thanks very much indeed. Okay, guys, it's a bit early in the day to frighten the bejesus out of you, but the fact of the matter is, for a long time, if we're honest, there was a soft touch approach to compliance around visas. Now, as you've heard me say before, permits and visas are two different things, two different documents, two different processes. And the WRC inspectors now are very active around this whole area because it's very politically sensitive. It's a very politically sensitive issue. Immigration, last week, a plane load of Georgians were sent out of the country. You don't hear those kind of things because they're not always on your radar, but it's very active, and it's a very active process of investigation. Now, in the past, if I'm honest, and you were inspected by a WRC inspector who has the responsibility of enforcing under the Permits Act, you would be given a certain amount of leniency. And if you were able to address the issues, then you wouldn't be prosecuted. Now that has been taken out of the hands of the inspectors, and the prosecution is automatic. So the directors of the business will find themselves in the district court and can be fined a significant amount of money but also the reputational damage to the business. Imagine being in the newspaper and in maybe reapplying for your license, because remember, it's the same body, the Workplace Relations Commission, who issue the license. So it's important that you have a very robust CRM scheme, guys, because an awful lot of people are getting caught out, and they're particularly getting caught out on the stamp twos. The stamp twos tend to be our Brazilian brothers and sisters who probably saved most of our lives during COVID, because they were doing the Deliveroo and the Uber and all that kind of stuff. And there was a very light touch approach to them, because in truth, they're not supposed to be doing that. Remember, a stamp two is not a work permit. It's an education permit, and they're permitted to work for 20 hours and 40 hours out of college time. And it's not 40 hours plus overtime or 20 hours plus overtime. It's 20 hours maximum and 40 hours. So make sure your CRM system is robust and is flagging in advance when people's permits are due to run out. They're really good at the system, to be fair. They're like the Irish, I suspect, when we went to America. We are experts on how to game the system. So don't take anything for granted. Don't make any assumptions. Your CRM system should be flagging to you when someone's permit is due, ideally 4 weeks out. And if they can produce evidence of where they have engaged with the immigration authorities here in Ireland, you get a 4-week grace period. No longer than that, guys. So after 4 weeks, you suspend them. It's really important you don't sack anybody, because you could end up in an unfair dismissals tribunal, because they are covered by employment law from day one. So really important that you mind yourself and watch your back on this. And that's the one to kind of watch. I want to bring you up to date very quickly on what's now called a new seasonal visa. So the government have decided in their wisdom to provide for a seasonal visa for growers and pickers of fruit and veg. So they're mostly the big Keelings operations. Some of you may be engaged in supplying general operatives and that kind of thing. So that visa is available. It's available for 7 months. It's from April to November, and your client must register to avail of the permit. Your client must register as a grower picker, so that they're what's called an approved body to employ these people for that time. They cannot stay after 7 months, so it's a 7-month visa, but it is in response to the horticultural sector in particular complaining that they haven't been able to get seasonal workers. So that's a new piece of news. Another new piece of news is to watch the trends. So if you take, the last quarter last year, we're down 30,000 placements. So there was 70,000 the year before. So in a full year, placements have dropped by over 30,000. So significant trends are happening, guys. You need to keep an eye on it, because it does influence your planning and in terms of where the business and the market might be and the developing markets might be. America. So before we get on to where all the permits are going to, there's 10,000 Americans came here last year. I mean, record numbers since Donald Trump came into power. Over 2,000 of those have been issued with critical skill permits. A lot of them have come on long stay visas, which means they are probably wealthy people or highly skilled people. That would suggest to me there's a pool of people there that are not being tapped into or researched or looked into in terms, but that is a very, very significant trend and change. Another trend we need to watch is, excuse me, in 2025, there was a fall off in April, May, June, July in critical skill permit applications for Indian citizens. Now, that's no small coincidence given the negative publicity that has been around our Indian brothers and sisters. But it's something to watch. It's a decline. India and Ireland have a very, very unique relationship. You've heard me talk about this before. President De Valera would have been a great friend of Gandhi and would have helped actually write the Indian constitution. Their flag is a tricolour, as you know, which is based on the Irish principle of flag. Many of the students in 1916 who went on to be leaders of India and Pakistan studied in Trinity College and were here during the 1916 rebellion, and in fact were motivated in their own struggle with the British Empire when they returned. The first Indian restaurant in Ireland was in O'Connell Street beside the Gresham Hotel in 1908, called the Indian Tea Rooms. And it reminds me of a very funny story I heard many years ago. Many of you are way too young to remember, but there was a program called Quicksilver where you won something like 50 pence. It's ridiculous, the prizes. But anyway, one of the questions famously was, where was the Taj Mahal? Now, we all know where the Taj Mahal was, but this genius went on. And of course, there was a restaurant in Dublin at the time, one of only two actually, which was called the Taj Mahal, and it was opposite the dental hospital in Trinity College. And of course, when he was asked the question, the whole nation were probably saying, "Sure, we know where it is," and we gave the answer. And this fella answered it was opposite the dental hospital in Trinity College, which of course wasn't the right answer, but that was his knowledge. So Indian students still make up the vast bulk, or not Indian students, Indian applications for the critical skills. You can see there was a report out this week where the Indian community are the top earners. They're the top earners outside of Irish nationals. That is the largest group outside of Ireland that are earning the highest money. And of course, that's in the health sector and that all those related disciplines that are happening. You can see by the graph there that there was approximately 40,000 visas issued last year. And you can see within that group, of course, India are one of the biggest. I'll just double check here, just bear with me for a second. So you had, this is from 130 countries now. So the visa network extends over 130 countries, which is really fantastic, very extensive. So in Brazil, you had 4,563. You had China, you had 1,900. And India, you had 13,566. You can see where the bulk of the visas are going. The Philippines, of course, again, many of them in the health care sector, nearly over 4,000. South Africa, that's starting to increase again. Now, I know there's a lot of issues around South Africa in terms of the visa, not the permit. So the work permit is working very well, but there are delays in South Africa. The minister was asked about this recently, and his answer was that they're just overwhelmed. It's just the volume. Remember, in a lot of countries, guys, we don't have an embassy, we have a consulate, which is a step below the embassy, so it doesn't have all the necessary supports that you typically have in an embassy, and that can lead to significant delays, which I suspect is what's happening depending what part of South Africa you're coming in from. I know the ERF have made representations to the government. Mary Kearney has raised it directly with the Taoiseach, the Minister for Enterprise, and indeed with the Minister for Justice. So the ERF are on the case, doing their best to highlight this. The permit section seems to be working pretty well. The visa section is where the problem seems to be. The minister confirmed there were over 200,000 applications into justice and immigration last year. So you can see the volumes are just enormous. Okay, so these are the permits by top countries. As you can see, I've said it's India, Brazil, even Pakistan. United States is increasing significantly, China, the Philippines, South Africa, but actually it goes right across the board. It's 130 countries right across the world. Fantastic that it's such a broad. Remember, the bulk of our workforce is Irish. So 75% of our workforce is Irish born. 25% of our workforce, about 600,000, are what's called non-Irish nationals, which is a terrible term, but it's not mine. That's what's commonly used to explain. From that grouping, from that, I suppose, where you're fishing in that pool of talent is primarily based in the European Union. So Spain, Italy, Poland is the top, would you believe? Outside of the European Union, the United Kingdom is next. And then we go down through the list, and it's very, very extensive. A lot of them are short stay visas, so they're 90 days, no issue. If you're from the UK, the issue becomes an issue with revenue. There's a double taxation problem. It can get quite complex. I know many agencies have been on to me over the years about this, where they're getting skilled people coming in from the UK in particular, and after 90 days, it runs into a huge problem in terms of revenue. But there is a solution. There's always a solution. If you need any help or any queries on that, please email me after this. Okay. So the sector, you can see there's growth in all sectors. Health continues to grow significantly. They reckon there'll be over 40,000 visas issued this year. Again, healthcare and its associated disciplines will be the top one there. You can see where IT absolutely fell off a cliff in 2022. Again, beginning to recover nicely. Hospitality tipping away. The one that surprises me no end is construction. So the CIF would tell us that there are over 100,000 vacancies, 100,000 vacancies in the construction sector. And yet look at the graph. And that graph attributes for about 1,500 or less visas. It really just doesn't make any sense. And of that 100,000, at least 30,000 are skilled carpenters, which are on the list, electricians, which are on the list. The list covering construction is very extensive. And there's at least 50,000 general operatives. And that is the vacancies that the CIF calculates. So I just did this particular graph just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand. I suppose there are limiting factors in terms of accommodation and affordability, but not at the high end. If people are trying to get a carpenter or trying to get a plumber, trying to get an electrician, and they earn very significant amounts of money, then accommodation shouldn't be the issue. But I just for the life of me can't understand that one. That kind of bewilders me a lot. So we fly down through it. Remember, guys, an employment permit is not a visa. They are two different concepts, two different departments. So one is enterprise, trade, and employment. The other is justice and the immigration section. The employment permit bit seems to be working pretty well. So that's why it says you cannot offer a contract it must be at least 12 weeks out from the date. Now, you can put in a caveat in the contract that says this date is subject to change pending the issuing of the appropriate work permit and visa. In other words, you can alter it, if it's too short or too long, whatever. Also, it's important to say that it must be for 2 years. For the critical skills, you're saying 2 years, but don't say fixed term for 2 years, because that doesn't encourage people to want to stay, because it's all about language. And in India, they love to see the notion that they may have an opportunity to stay indefinitely. So you would say words like, this is a contract of indefinite duration with a minimum of 2 years. That's kind of how you should phrase this. Again, the visa is where the problem seems to be, and I've already addressed that. Some visas seem to happen very, very quickly. I know one client who's waiting 18 weeks now for visas from South Africa. I mean, seriously. So I know there's been representations made to the Minister for Health saying, you're crying out for doctors, you're telling us there's loads of vacancies. The agency are doing the best to identify where this talent is in the talent pool, go to all the trouble of resourcing, go to all the trouble of onboarding, and then it takes them 18, plus weeks to get a visa to come to Ireland. Like, seriously, there's something wrong. This now, just if I may, on the visa, watch the visa entry, guys. The employment permit will not allow you entry into the Republic of Ireland. Only a visa will. And a number of people are getting turned away at the airport because they're not bringing their full documentation. So advise either your clients or the candidates that they must bring their folder with their permit, all their application, copies of everything, and they must have health insurance. Now, what a lot of them are doing is they're overcoming the health insurance issue because none of them are entitled to state benefits. So either the client is made aware of that and they offer health insurance as part of the package, but how a lot of them are overcoming it is it's with the travel insurance. So they're buying very good, decent travel insurance that will give them at least 12 months cover. And then within that 12 months cover, they're dealing with the health insurance issue, but it is a key issue for a visa officer. So if you have an immigration officer at our port of entry here, They can refuse your entry on a number of grounds. They might also do an Interpol check or whatever, but it's normally on documentation, or they've no money. They arrive with a credit card, or they're not quite sure where they're staying, or they're not quite sure what they're earning, so they've no copy of the contract. And so 2,000 people were refused. So a significant amount of people have got their permits, got their visa, arrive at their port of entry, and have been refused entry. So just be careful and aware of that. An employment permit is not a visa. They're two different things, two different concepts. This is the one you guys are going to come across probably most frequently, the critical skills, the general. Atypical is kind of the 90-day thing. It probably shouldn't come across your desk in honesty too often. You have Intel, big companies that bring in specialized skills for shorter periods of time, usually from the UK or Northern Ireland. Students and graduates, well, that's the stamp too that gets everyone into trouble. The Brazilians, I have 70 Brazilians in my class that I lecture in. And the joke every week is, how many hours did you do this week? Sure, knowing fucking well that they did whatever they had to do to live, and the best of luck to them. But the truth of the matter is that's the real one to watch, guys. The labour market access letter, you guys don't seem to like this one. You seem quite, I don't know what's the word, but reluctant to engage with this one. There's probably about 39,000 approved labour market access people sitting in IPAS centres today, ready to go. Your fear is that you can't Garda check them, or you can't get any real references or background checks, and you want to be able with a hand on heart to send people to your clients thinking, you know what, I did my due diligence here, and I know that's off-putting, but please be assured they're already in the system 5 months at that stage. They're fingerprinted, they're photographed, they're checked on the Interpol webs to see if they're wanted criminals from their home countries. They are, the authorities, the FBI, there's a whole range of vetting goes on here that's obviously not shared with you, but does happen as a reality. And by the time they get to the 6 month, they get their letter. They can work for 12 months. Be careful on this one. This is where people get caught out. They must have a renewal letter. Okay, they must have another renewal letter for 12 months, and they must have that blue card, which is the residency card, to match. You must keep documentation. So all non-EU nationals, you must keep the documentation. So that's a copy of the permit, a copy of the visa for 3 years after they've left employment. You can be inspected up to 3 years after they have left employment, and you can be prosecuted up to 3 years after they've left the employment. So really important you keep a copy. Funny enough, you're not allowed to keep a copy of an Irish passport. You're allowed to see it. You're allowed to record that number, but you're not allowed to copy it. So remember that under GDPR legislation, you're not allowed to copy EU nationals or an Irish passport. And you don't need an Irish passport to get a job. So remember that. All you need to do is proof of your right to work. So critical skills, it's a fantastic list. It's very extensive. What I'm shocked by is the amount of recruiters that don't actually read that list. It's important you read it because it's added to from time to time. And indeed, it's taken away from. So if you take the general employment list, and let's say the government last year agreed that there would be 500 truck drivers of a particular type of truck. And it's a bit like home stores and more. When they're gone, they're gone. And every now and again, those visa runs out. So there's an allocation of visas for specific skills in a specific industry, and the government will grant a limited amount of permits. So it's important that you check in on the website every now and again. The critical skills, it says what it says on the tin, and that's what it does. It's a government policy specifically aimed at attracting high value, high skilled people into our country with a view to actually living here. And that's kind of the strategy of the government. The salary must be between 38 to 64. They are allowed to bring their spouse, partner, family, and whatever the legal definition is of a partner, same-sex marriage, civil marriage, and so on. So there's different definitions, thank you, on the website that you can see. And they're allowed to come in immediately. And they can also work. So they can apply for, so now you have, and if you've dealt with the candidate, dealt with them well, minded the client, got the candidate in, you could then get the family member who will then, once they come in, they will get approval to get a permit and to work as well. And that's a great source of pipeline business for the agency to consider. The contract must be for 2 years, but I want to be very clear. They must stay for the first 9 months. They can change up to 3 times in the life cycle of that permit, up to 2 years, but they must notify the department within 28 days of their change of employment, and they must supply the department with the new contract of employment. So be careful, be mindful, watch your back on this one. It's okay and they must change within the specific skill set. So you can't have someone coming in saying, I was only joking, I don't like doing that, I'd like to drive a truck instead. You cannot go from a critical skills to a general skills permit. It's just not permissible, and it doesn't make any sense, obviously. So again, just watch it. Watch the website. It is quite user friendly. I know, like, it's like going into the tax office and you come out more confused than you went in, but actually it's designed to try and assist you and help you. And I know sometimes the language can be a little bit challenging, but really this is about you gaining confidence and competency around a key area that affects your clients and your candidates. Okay, so the duration is for 2 years, and then they can go for stamp 4 eligibility after 21 months. Now, that's why this is called a golden visa, because as you know, the stamp 4 does then not require any further permits. And all of that time is put against their application for nationality eventually. So really a fantastic visa if one was lucky enough to get one in terms of coming to the country. And it really is. And again, remember, the resident permit card is required. So at all times when someone makes an application to you guys, for whatever reason, and you've got to keep documentation, you've got to keep it for 3 years, and you've got to photograph everything, okay? General permit is different. It's a bit more tricky, a bit more challenging. It is 34,000. You know, it's 30,000 for people in the healthcare sector, in horticulture, a different kind of a setup, different arrangement there. The spouses and children are allowed in, but that's after 1 year, so they're not allowed in immediately. Again, they can apply for a stamp. I think it's a stamp 1G, maybe. Do I have that right? I think it is, yeah. And they can work pretty much. There's no limit to what they can do. Again, a great source of pipeline business for the agency. But their stamp 4 eligibility is after 5 years, not 2 years, or not 21 months. It's after 5 years. Now, this is the one that requires the labour market needs test. Now, watch this one. You must put up the advertisement 28 days before you make the application. You cannot do it at the same time, okay? It's not possible to be rejected. So that advertisement is as if you were advertising for a job in Ireland or the European Union, and that's its purpose. That's why you must advertise on the government's European Union website, which you can see there, guys, and on another website within the Republic of Ireland, which advertises the job. You must wait the 28 days before you make the application for the general employment. It's not required for the critical skills visa. There's also a 50-50 rule. So it's not 50-50 cashback. Some of you might remember the old ad. This is a 50-50 rule, that there must be more than 50% of the employer's employment is from Irish EU citizens. And that is strictly enforced, except where it's in the medical profession, where an exemption can be granted by the minister on application. If it's a new startup business, that will be considered. Or, as I said, by ministerial order, if a business case is made. So it's not an absolute in that terms. Okay, that's kind of the one that's catching people out, is the market needs test. Really, really crucial in terms of the. Now, again, watch it's really very, very extensive. You go on, you'll be quite surprised by the list. Now, there are obvious ones that it doesn't cover, and your client might come on, and I'm sure the critical skill or employment skill is critical to them. It doesn't make it because the first thing you look at is the ineligibility list. That's the one that's kind of what's going to guide you. Everything else after that flows from that. Labour market access, permission for employment, I've talked to you about that. This is a bit of a pain, this one, to administer, because after 28 days, you must advise the department on where the individual, if they ceased employment. And the reason for that is they're tracking where everybody is. That's the whole purpose of this letter, is to make sure that at any time the department knows where everyone is who's gone through the asylum system, the protection system as it's referred to. So again, low entry business, loads of about 39,000 people sitting in hotel rooms now, IPAS centres waiting for an opportunity to work, ready to work. Won't suit all trades, won't suit all opportunities. But again, it's a big source of a talent pool there that you guys should give some serious consideration to. Okay, that's the eligibility requirement. You have it on the screen there. It's something that you can see it's double printed sided. That's all done deliberately because it's not faked, and some countries seem to be particularly good at faking these documents. And just watch it. Just watch your back. You know, if it looks dodgy, it's dodgy. You can get on. Actually, you can get online. You can contact. You can see it. LMALI. Is that an I? No. Sorry. Queries at Justice. Should have gone to Specsavers at queries.justice.ie, and they will reply to you. They'll come back to you in real time, not AI, and they will answer your query and verify whether the document is real or not. So it's something to consider as terms of a talent pool. That's the employment restrictions, so they can't work in the civil service. Obviously, they can't be guards. The 50-50 rule applies there, and all the other conditions that attach to that are there for you to ponder on. That's your responsibilities. Siobhan mentioned it at the start because, again, I won't lie to you, there is a big crackdown on this in terms of permits. I've had a few clients onto me now in a bit of a panic in recent weeks, and their CRM systems have let them down, or whoever was looking after it didn't do a particularly good job. Because I know, to be fair, in recruitment, it's about filling the booking. And famously, I had a client many years ago who used to say to me, look, Dave, it's all about filling the booking and getting the few bob. We'll worry about the paperwork afterwards. Well, just watch your back on this one, guys, because it's a very active space, and I don't be reading about you in the paper anytime soon. That's the penalties for non-compliance. And I won't bore you with all that because I think I've done a half-decent job in frightening you so far. So that's kind of the checklist you need to do when you're navigating the permanent visa space. You need to check the eligibility. So, you know, don't go through a whole lot of work here and for them find out at the end of it they're not actually eligible at all. Make sure the documents are prepped. What do they need? There's great advice, help online there. Just go on. They're great websites, to be fair. The government have a new fancy portal for the application, seems to work really well. The submission is the application prep and submission. And then the visa application is separate. Remember that separate types of documents, proofs, all those kind of things, two different departments, two different processes, two different timelines, to be honest. So you've got to watch the timelines, give yourself as much time as you can. I know that isn't always possible. But it seems to work well on the permit side. Definitely the deficit seems to be on the visa side. And there is significant pressure being put on the government to try and get that speeded up or advanced. That's the new fancy portal. Go on it, have a look at it. It's quite user-friendly. The real trick here is if your client or you or anyone else, and remember, no agency can ever hold permits, no agency can ever make an application for permits. You're forbidden under your license and the Act, the 1971 Act. But your client might come on looking for advice. I know clients who've come on who said, God, I spent thousands with a solicitor or whatever, help me with permits. And is there not a simpler, cheaper way to do it? Well, the answer is yes, there is. This is a really good website, a lot of consultation of feedback from users, and it seems to work pretty well. A lot of good positives. So go on, have a look at it. To become what's called a trusted partner of any government department is kind of the gold standard, and it speeds up everything. You could get a permit in 2 weeks. That would normally take 4 to 6, probably a visa in 2 to 4 weeks. So it's worth doing it well, it's worth doing it right, and it's worth getting to that status because that status gives you those extra benefits. So candidates from Ireland, it's the type 4 are the Goldust, that's where they are, and their spouses and partners, because after a very short period, they can apply for stamp 4 status. Normally, I think it's something like 82% go on to be Irish nationals, usually high. Remember, there's about 60,000, 70,000 Brazilians living in Ireland now. There's probably 100,000 Indians in the Indian community, very, very large. Also remember, I got a query during the week on one of the stamps, one of the cards, where it says place of birth, nationality, and the place of birth and nationality were different. Well, my daughter, Scarlett, was born in India, but she's an Irish citizen. So don't be kind of put off by that. Just check it and say, one is a place of birth, the other is your nationality. And that's why it might look dodgy and you might think, oh, that looks like a fraud or a fake. So that's kind of the explanation for that, okay? So we go quickly on. Just so here you are, stamp 1. Now, there's a lot of confusion about stamp 1. I had a question from an agency that asked me, can you employ stamp 1 holders on contracts and on payroll positions only? And the answer is yes, you can. But it's about the permit. So it's not about the stamp. There are loads of stamp 1 holders. Some have permission to work without permits, and others have can work with a permit. The trick is to find out which category they fall into, and their documentation will advise you on that. But you can employ stamp 1. In fact, stamp 1 can set up their own business. But again, there are limitations to certain stamp 1, and there are availability for to work on other stamp 1. So it's not a blanket no. Important to know that, okay? Stamp 1G are graduates, they're our Brazilian friends by and large, who graduate. They can go on, they don't need a permit, they can work for up to a year, and they can extend that, which a lot of them do. Remember, none of their time served in Ireland goes towards their nationality. I know it sounds unfair, but that's just the way it is, and that's how that stamp works. Remember, nearly 5,000 applicants this year alone from Brazil for stamp 2, and most of these become the stamp 1G, and indeed most of them then work here, look for nationality, and works very well. Stamp 4, you know that one, guys, that's the golden one. And investors and entrepreneurs. And there's other cases of long-term residence, and long-term residence can be granted to US citizens, for example. And stamp 3 then is the family member one. In other words, great. These are all great. These are all really the go-to stamps in terms of permission and visas. People who have this really great talent pool, if you can get into that. Remember, it's all about relationship at the start. Indian people, I worked in India. Indian people are very structured. They're very familiar with authority. They're very familiar with rules. They like a rule-based system. They know when people are going the extra mile. Remember, they have a very active ambassador here, very active Indian community here. So they get advice, they get information. So if you can supply them with the local auctioneer, if you can supply them with the local church, if they're Christians coming from Kerala, for example, if you can supply them with little bits of information, your favorite Indian restaurant or Indian restaurants or whatever, they know you're going the extra mile for that candidate. And that's what they buy into, because they know Ireland is a friendly country, but they're nervous coming here. You could imagine, if anyone's been to India, the culture is so different. I mean, it's just so incredibly different. These are very motivated, intelligent, capable people who by and large have a really good positive experience when they come to Ireland. So best practice, guys, is about you informing yourself around the talent pool, where it is, what's the opportunities, the new markets emerging, what trick are you missing, looking after the candidates, going the extra mile, getting that 4-star review, and then looking after in other words, being an authority on this subject, being someone who is confident and competent when a client rings, and you can absolutely answer this 110%, allowing for all the misinformation that we live in this world today. So there are all the websites, guys. They're really good. I know the language sometimes can be a bit challenging and confusing. Bit like, as I said, going to the tax office for the first time, you come out more confused than you went in. But after a while, it'll all make kind of sense. It'll all fit into a pattern that you say, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I get that. I understand that. You know, I had a question the other day about Ukrainians. Ukrainians are not a problem. They enjoy European Union status. So, you know, don't be stressing about the Ukrainians. They're the least of your worries. You know, people are talking about Georgia, but Georgia is not considered a safe country. They are being deported. So you need to inform yourself, be wise, be sensible, and above all else, watch your back, because this stuff is as serious as cancer. I mean, if you get inspected now, there is no room for wiggle room here for, you know, in the past, we'd say we'd seek forgiveness rather than permission. This is an automatic prosecution. We have three agencies at the moment being prosecuted in court. That's the definition of a foreign national under immigration legislation. And that's, to remind Siobhan, it's 3,000, or imprisonment up to 12 months. Conviction on indictment, and that means the circuit court, is up to 10 years. And there is no defence. I've never been in court, Mary and I have never gone into court, and ignorance has never been accepted as a defence. So I want to wish you well with everything, guys. I'm here, Mary's here, if we can assist you in any way. I hope you found that interesting and informative. If you have any questions or any emails you want to send me, then I'll do my best to answer them.
Dave, thanks a million for that. That was hugely informative as ever. Just in the context of applying for public sector work, one of the things that I don't think people realise is in the event that you get a summary conviction, um, under Irish criminal law, and this is criminal law, not civil law, then that prohibits you from properly filling a declaration for tendering for public work. So one of the things for the consultants and agency owners and directors to be aware of is in the event that you get a summary conviction under any of this legislation, for whatever reason, you will be precluded from tendering successfully for any other public sector work. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm, ray of sunshine here as ever. Compliance is it's just too important, and the consequences are just too far reaching. Some of the questions that are coming in, one specifically is, if somebody has a permit that's tied to one employer, can they still work as they're transferring it to the other employer, or do you need to suspend them?
No, they can't. They can't transfer it. So remember, it's only 9 months. It's not a servitude. Nobody can be locked into slavery. That's anti-slavery. So it's 9 months. There is a reasonable expectation, allowing for the cost and everything else, that people would stay for 9 months. But they can inform the department that they've been offered a new job. They send on the new contract of employment, and they ask for the permit to be switched either to the new job or to themselves.
Another thing that's come up, an awful lot of nursing homes. How strict are they with the 50-50 rules for critical skills? Because an awful lot of nursing homes are struggling for nurses under this rule.
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for asking for it. I suppose it's one of those areas where you've got to make the business case to the department. Strictly speaking, the 50-50 rule is not strictly employed in the healthcare settings, because the HSE, make this, or if it's a private, I mean, they just know the challenges and they know the demands. So the 50-50 rule can be waived, but only the department can do that.
I'm going to modify this question so that you're capable of answering it. At the moment, when people come in with refugee status and they have permission to access the Irish labour market, the Irish Refugee Council are advising agencies or anybody that inquires that these people are free to work in any sector whatsoever and shouldn't be prohibited. They've been fully vetted, as you said, by Interpol or by the authorities. They've been photographed. They've had their fingerprints taken. However, barriers still exist in terms of employing them in the healthcare sector because of the fact that they will not pass Garda vetting. Have you come across that a lot?
Yeah, I have. And to be fair, the system is set up to protect vulnerable adults and children. So you have the Gardaí interpretation of the law, as you painfully know, Siobhan. And then you have our need to make a few bob and place somebody. And then you have the HSE need for qualified, suitable people. So you've got this terrible kind of tug of war going on.
But the candidate who does not have a verifiable...
No, it is. That said, I know of circumstances where people have cleared the Garda vetting. So it's not true to say that it's a complete, there's no blanket. So there's no intentional stop on anybody within that grouping applying for employment. It is set out, it's set out in terms of what they can't be. They can't be civil servants, they can't be Gardaí, they can't join the army. I mean, there are certain criteria set out. It's there actually, set out very clearly what they can and they can't do. It doesn't say that they can't work in an environment that requires Garda vetting. It's about what information they can supply to satisfy the Garda. What the Garda vetting won't do, Siobhan, and you know this, they will not vary their application process to suit a particular sector. You either meet the criteria on the Garda vetting or you don't. It's really that simple. But there's nothing in the provision of that letter, as you can see, I've just brought up the slide, that says they can't apply. Of course they can.
Super. Another question is, with any of these employment permit types, there's a question of whether or not somebody can work for themselves in addition to working
They can. Yes, they
for an
can.
employer. However, in the context of stamp twos, Dave,
Yeah.
during term time, how rigorous do you need to be to satisfy yourselves that you are the only person providing that person with their 20 hours work?
Yeah, it's a great question, Siobhan. Thanks for asking it. But the truth of it is, in all Irish law, the word reasonable is used. It's used by the legislator intentionally to what would a judge or a third party deem reasonable. Now, what is reasonable is you have a clocking system or time cards, whatever. Someone signs a declaration to say they're only working 40 hours a week. There's nothing more you can do. But we know in truth, if we're honest, hand on heart, we know in truth, in reality, that that's not the case. That's not our job to police, actually. That is the responsibility of the authorities. It's not our job. Once you're satisfied that you can account for anyone on a stamp 2 working a maximum of 20 or 40 hours in the permitted period, and you have timesheets to back that up, that is a reasonable expectation for any employer to deliver on.
That's the same expectation under the Organisation of Working Time Act, isn't it, Dave? You can give somebody your time off, we can't determine what they do with it.
That's it.
Super. Okay, Dave, I have to say that's been hugely informative, and the comments have been really, really positive, and there's an awful lot of gratitude being shown to you. Anna has put up the questions that came up in the last session and the answers that you provided, which are really, really appreciated. So I suppose from my perspective and as from the ERF, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Dave. You're an absolute critical resource in our business, and anybody who wants to further engage directly with Dave, if you have specific queries, the advice Dave has given today is general and it cannot be used as a defense for a specific individual query. In the event that you want to engage in that with Dave in that fashion, all you have to do is contact him at David, D-A-V-I-D, at HRbrief, B-R-I-E-F, .ie. And as I say, Dave is an expert on employment law, contracts, GDPR. He's a registered DPO. He lectures on the subject. And obviously he has kept an awful lot of our members clean when it comes to employment restrictions, visas and permits.
There's a character, I think, in Peppa Pig. Used to be Scarlett's favorite character. I think it was the elephant, and he was kind of a know-it-all, so kind of like the elephant in Peppa Pig. That's my handle.
Yeah, I have to say you've kept me out of trouble more than once, so I appreciate that. Anybody
You're very kind. Thanks very much.
who didn't get to catch the session live, it's also been streamed on LinkedIn. So if you go to the ERF on LinkedIn, you will be able to further watch it or send it to your colleagues. And again, if anybody wants to contact Dave directly, it's david at hrbrief.ie. Thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it.